and that's one huge difference among other things. You could even talk about like structure and cell walls of animal cells versus plant cells, for example, things like that. There's definitely other differences. There's different organelles and things like that. But the reality is what makes plants really special and amazing is the fact that they can make their own food, and in part that is taking that carbon, that hydrogen, and that oxygen and making it into sugars. So, but that's the things that are kind of out there and free floating and gas exchanges where that's attained. This is not what happens necessarily with nitrogen. Even though nitrogen is a gas, that's not how plants attain it.
No. Hey, welcome back to the Jug Dealers podcast. We are here in the Jug Den at the studio.
At 5A Distribution.
And we're
here
back.
At the mothership.
We're back. It's just us
Yep,
today. And, we wanted to go over some things for our fresh new listeners. So let's get started.
We wanted to kind of back up a little bit. Obviously, we jumped into this a little bit, which has not been a bad thing. We really appreciate everybody getting on board, starting to have some good listens, and we very much appreciate that. But we want to step back a little bit and say, hey, just so you know, this is kind of what our goals of the show are. I think it's been somewhat evident with already what we're doing, but just to be very clear, we wanted to talk about what we're doing here. This is the Jug Dealers podcast. We are here to talk jugs. We are here to deal jugs. We are here to talk growing. That's one of the real, the heart and soul of this show is definitely,
right.
Growing and good grow knowledge, and but also, really a goal at connecting with our end users and being able to, answer questions that we're getting on social media in real time. Talk about where we're traveling. Talk about different suggested readings, different lifestyle things. Just kind of really, somewhat make it a show as much as we can with the heart and soul of growing and plants and that, but also a lifestyle show that really anybody can find at least a little bit that they can groove with.
Yep. And if we were to go like any good business out there and kind of put out a mission statement or an ethos, our goal is to really bring education, bring informative and interesting guests to people, and to really kind of tie it all together because, as we've seen throughout our lives, both of you and I have had cannabis in our lives since we were teenagers,
right?
And realistically, most of the people we know, most of the people we interact with, most of the reasons that we've chosen the life paths we've chosen.
Well, I was even talking today about a lot of the places that I've traveled around the world. You know what I mean? Like so cannabis has really done a lot for both of us. So we also want to give back because of that. And it's something that is a passion of Gabe and ours, is to inform people, is to help people do the best that they can and really, expand on their own personal hobby and personal journey with this. So, you're going to see, as we kind of get in the groove here, you're going to kind of say, some grow talk, you're going to see some lifestyle stuff, and then you're going to see, a lot more of that community interaction. If you really looked at it kind of in three parts. Also, I did want to mention we will have a website coming. It will be jugdealerspodcast.com, I believe. That's correct, Grambo, if I'm right? Mr. Grambo. We've got Grambo on the mic here. Grambo, say hello to everybody.
What up, Juggernauts? My camera's a little wonky right now.
Yeah, he's the man behind the camera. He is the third Jug Dealer, so we will be referring to him as he's got all the fun little buttons and computer stuff back there. Keeps us in line. You know what I mean?
Well, look, dude. With no further ado, let's kind of jump into. I'll be honest with you. This is something I've been really excited about. Mainly because in the last year, when we were doing Ready, Set, Grow and we had everything else going on, I had a lot of people coming to me and complaining that they weren't really getting a lot out of the stuff they were listening to. They didn't, one of the things we're really focused on is we want people to feel like they've gained something from listening to us, regardless of whether it's having people like Kind Bill or our next guest on,
right?
Who we're not going to get into.
Our last guest?
Yeah, our last guest, yeah. But that's one of the things is we really want people to kind of leave the show feeling like they've learned something. So today, what we're going to do is we've decided we're going to bring you a series on elements and minerals and plants. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the first mineral in plants, the one that's, arguably the most important, nitrogen. So let's get started.
Yeah, and it's something that you're going to see us, break it down. We're going to start with nitrogen today. I think we're probably going to do an NP and K, start with the macros, then probably do calcium, magnesium, sulfur, kind of as a secondary macros, and then the micros, and then even go into some of the other things, that we know to be plant beneficial, but maybe not plant essential, so some different biostimulants and things like that. There's definitely some interesting things. Again, heart and soul, of a grow show, but also that's going to come a lot from you guys. We are going to depend on the interaction. We want to have questions from you guys, whether you're reaching out to us on the Jug Dealers podcast on Instagram. We will eventually have, an ability to reach out to us through the website as well. Of course, you can find both Gabe and I on our Instagrams, GMoneyLove, Jaron_H. Easy to find us. So please do interact, because that helps us keep the show as interesting as possible.
Yep.
So today,
first, we have our 17 essential elements that exist in the world, and the first of those are 3, which are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen.
Right.
And so plants actually do a good job of kind of dealing with a lot of that themselves naturally.
Well, and they are autotrophs. And what that means is somebody that makes their own food, right? Us as humans and animals and things like that, they're heterotrophs, right? They have to go and they have to get their own food. So that's really, truly what makes plants amazing. That's one huge difference, among other things. You could even talk about like structure and cell walls of animal cells versus plant cells, for example, things like that. There's definitely other differences. There's different organelles and things like that. But the reality is what makes plants really special and amazing is the fact that they can make their own food, and in part that is taking that carbon, that hydrogen, and that oxygen and making it into sugars. So, but that's the things that are kind of out there and free floating, and gas exchanges where that's attained. This is not what happens necessarily with nitrogen. Even though nitrogen is a gas, that's not how plants attain it.
No. Hey, Grambo. Grambo, the next one, dude.
There we are.
As we go through it, plants basically get these 3 ones from the environment, but then from there, through photosynthesis, plants, do a lot of the assimilation themselves. But when we're dealing in the processes that we're dealing with, where we're in hydroponics, we're in cocoa, we're in rock wool, we're in these inert media, we actually have to supply a lot of those elements ourselves.
Indeed.
In which the first one we're going to talk about today is nitrogen. So nitrogen, if you look at it on the periodic table, it's number 7 on the periodic table. Basically,
and we're not chemists.
Yeah, and we're...
If you can move to the next slide. So it is, obviously, like we said, its atomic number is 7. You can find out all of its atomic weights and all that kind of things. That's not really what we're concerned with here. It is an inert gas, and it is, I believe, the most prevalent gas that we have in the atmosphere.
It's actually 78% of our atmosphere.
Today, what we want to talk about is specifically is nitrogen. Obviously, we know there are 17 plant essential elements. I think a lot of people, think about the food side of it and don't really consider, first and foremost, the free ones that are there, right? Which is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Those are gotten out of the atmosphere. That's what plants use to make their own food. Like we were saying, that's what an autotroph is in plants. It makes its own food, and it takes that. Those things is what they actually use to make the sugar, to make food. Everything else is essentially structural to the plant, which is kind of interesting, which is funny because people call it plant food, but like it really... I mean,
they're more like vitamins.
Yeah. It's a weird structural thing, right? So, but when we get to things that are actually added to the plant that aren't free, right? The other 14 are minerals, and nitrogen, number 7 is what we're going to be talking today. NPK being the macros, right? Yep. That's what people know: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That's what's listed on every bottle. You do have magnesium, sulfur, and calcium. After that, those are also technically considered macros. I think we'll probably put those in their own show.
I think
we're going to split up NP and K, probably put those in their own shows, and then talk about, micros. One thing I do like to mention is, there's 17 plant essential that we know of. And I only like to make that mention is because when you get into the micronutrients, some of them are so incredibly small. Instrumentation wise, as far as science goes, we haven't been able to prove some of the, undoubtedly there's more than 17. So I do like to make that mention because, it really is, it's just a nod to science and that it is something that's built, it's a constant progression of building, off the shoulders of others and off the information of others. So right now it's 17, tomorrow it could be 18.
Well, and we always say that just because it doesn't say they're essential doesn't mean they're not beneficial.
Well, that's the other thing we always like to talk about, right? Because beneficial, even if it's not essential, where it doesn't need it to do everything, certain things can promote positive stresses, like we like to talk about, to then actually get some plant benefits for what we're trying to do, which as oil farmers is produce oil, right? So there are definitely other things, and that's something we're gonna progress into as these shows go in is the things, and that's kind of what will end up with some of these that that are known effective biostimulants, but would definitely not be considered plant essential, would only be considered plant beneficial, right? Okay, so could you go to the next slide, please? One more, please. So, of course, we do have a couple slides that are behind us here because, again, we are not chemists. No. So we do have a couple notes, so don't anybody skew us for that. But nitrogen is a chemical element with the symbol N, like we said, atomic number is 7. It's a non-metal. And
it actually exists in the atmosphere as N2.
N2, yes. So it's two nitrogen together, which from a chemical standpoint does matter. For us right now, it doesn't matter a whole lot, but it is something worth mentioning. It is 78% of our atmosphere is actually nitrogen. It's the lightest member of its group, and it is a nonmetal, of course, being a gas. Nitrogen compounds constantly interchange in the atmosphere in living organisms. That's part of that N2 aspect.
Well, and it's part of the fixing part as well. Yeah. And one of the things that I learned, putting this whole thing together was with it existing in the environment as N2,
right,
there's actually a lot of energy that goes into breaking it down.
Right. Those bonds, the energy that's in those bonds.
It's a triple bond.
Right.
So in order to break that bond, it takes an amazing amount of energy.
Which is cool that's where lightning comes in, where lightning can actually create like that.
Actually, something I learned that was something pretty cool we'll talk about in a minute, but 200 million tons a year is produced naturally in the environment through nitrogen.
Wow.
7 million tons of that is actually produced through lightning.
Wow.
So it's actually pretty cool. Now, nitrogen, when they produce these things, they actually use it for a multitude of different products. We'll use it for fertilizer.
Yeah, fertilizer being, honestly, the big one. Of course, people also know, and this is really kind of part and parcel, in all honesty, because post-World War II and what we consider like the Green Revolution, right, is interesting because now we're looking back on a lot of that, and it's not feeling so green anymore.
No.
Like even when you talk about like seed oils and things like that, which were truly like lubricants through the war.
Yep.
Now it's a cooking oil. You know what I mean? And so there's just a lot of interesting things. It's the same thing. It's like, within one generation, went from like, my grandparents, didn't, my parents' generation was basically not breastfed because the generation above them, which would be our grandparents' generation, was told that that's not necessary anymore, that just use this in a bottle, it's better. And that's when you had, mass processed foods and canning and all these kind of things. That was that era. Well, this is that similar era. It's that post World War II. What the hell are we going to do with all this stuff? And because we were making a lot of it for bombs, quite frankly.
Well, it's funny because if you go back historically, originally people would use they'd use animal waste.
Yeah,
they'd use compost.
Pre World War II and probably even partially World War I, but most of World War II.
Pre World War I.
There was none of this was being done. The Haber-Bosch process was not being done. This nitrogen creation and capturing and fixing wasn't being done yet. You know what I mean?
So basically, what happened was. Before that, they had either used compost or
waste.
Absolutely.
They had compost, animal waste.
They had mined saltpeter from Chile, but that was one of the only places in the world you could get it. There was a guy in the late 1800s, 1890, named William Crooks, who actually went out.
What a name!
Who actually went out and he said, look. There's a limited supply of nitrogen out there.
Sure.
We need to figure something out. I can't remember. It was Fritz Haber was the guy who basically developed the process. So from 1890 till 1909. It took 20 years for Haber to basically develop the process, but he couldn't really figure it out on a large scale.
Couldn't actually make it work. He could get it on paper.
And so
but he couldn't.
They actually, he put it out to another German scientist named Bosch, who worked for BASF.
Bosch.
And Bosch actually figured out how to do it on an industrial scale. But basically what they do...
And this is specifically the creation of ammonium nitrate.
Yeah, and this was specifically, but the ammonium nitrate then becomes the base for all the other things. But basically what they ended up doing was they would take in air because, like we said, it's 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. They would take in the air. They would compress it down to 200 times our atmosphere.
Wow, so 200 ATMs.
Yeah,
right?
and then they would add heat. In which that actually is where this becomes an energy-intensive process.
I was about to say this is where it flips over, where it goes. Are you getting as much out as you're putting in? Because it's very energy-intensive.
And then they add steam, and steam is H2O. Mm-hmm. So what happens is you use all that energy to break the N2 into two single ends, and then basically you're introducing that hydrogen from the H2O.
And it's what, NH4 plus?
NH3 or NH4 plus.
Yeah, so ammonia or ammonium.
Ammonia or ammonium, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but it's a very energy intensive process, And
at the time it was deemed, obviously worth doing once it came to wartime, because it could be used for, and really post-war we had all this infrastructure that was set up for that. And so that's really when you started seeing it used as a fertilizer, because it wasn't used previously as a fertilizer.
Well, and if you look at it, 1909, 1911, so both of those men actually won Nobel Peace Prizes or Nobel Prizes, I shouldn't say Peace Prizes, but they were Nobel Prizes. But they won Nobel Prizes in chemistry for that stuff.
Yeah.
But that was right around when World War I was ripping off and the Germans. Sure. So it became very, very important for munitions and stuff.
Right. And of course, nylon and dyes and some other things. There's some other, nitric acid, there's some other things, but really where you see the two biggest things is fertilizers and explosives still to this day.
Yep. And honestly, that, if you look beyond that, that's where when we came back from World War II, we had all these bombs to dismantle. We had a population boom.
And we had infrastructure. We were able to, we were creating it. So, that's where you also saw a lot of, some of these hybrid crops coming in, high intensity and high performing crops that were very nitrogen intensive, things like that. So, as far as what nitrogen does in a plant, you can go ahead and kick to the next. Yes, nitrogen is an essential macronutrient like we're talking about. It's a key component for amino acids.
Building block of proteins,
Building blocks of proteins, exactly, which, nitrogen is a nitrogenous base, right?
Yep.
So RNA, DNA, things like that. So, it's enzymes, things like that, all proteins, which enzymes are proteins. So obviously no shortage of usage of nitrogen.
And with it being a macro, translocate throughout the plant. So for those of you who are the rookie growers, and maybe for those of you who aren't, who just sometimes forget, remember when you see those leaves on the lower half of your plant, at the bottom of your plant turning yellow, that's nitrogen going where it needs to go to the top of the plant. So
right. Because it is mobile. It's one of the few ones, that are mobile. And most things that are mobile in the plant have to exist in different ionic forms. So like things like calcium and iron that exist as, either 2+ or 3+. And that's how a plant talks, to itself. But yeah, obviously, I don't think it's a shock to anybody that nitrogen's a macronutrient, and it's used in a multitude of different processes in the plant. Nitrogen's use uptake, which I think again is not going to be much surprise to anybody. Its highest use is during vegetative
80%,
growth,
up to 80%.
Yeah. So again, that's when the structure's really coming in. That's when they're stacking cell walls. That's when they're doing all that kind of stuff. So totally makes sense. Obviously, now the nitrogen process, and as far as the atmospheric aspect of it, and I think this will probably be something that we'll post just because it's a great graphic.
Well, it's good for the organic gardener to understand.
Well, exactly.
And you're not for nothing, bro. You're with your background,
right?
Water
soluble form and everything. Reality is, though, we really don't know how it gets from point A to point B. There's a lot of processes in plants that we don't have any idea about, and I always like to make that point just because they are so mysterious. They are so incredible. This is the land of the unknown, and that's why. And the reason I make that is because sometimes I think people think too much about what they can do to a plant or being a grower or whatever else, as opposed to just understanding that a plant is growing itself.
Yeah, autotroph.
Yeah, it's an autotroph, dude. Like, it's doing it itself. We're plant janitors. Somebody actually, I saw on a Discord the other day, somebody actually quoted me as saying the plant janitors. Whoever that was, I appreciate you shouting me out on that quote, because it's something that I really believe in. You know what I mean? We're there to be a steward of the plant. We're there to be a steward of their environment. But a plant's doing it itself. There's no doubt about it. So, how the plant's getting this nitrogen naturally is one way. Then there's the whole other way. And of course, that is us putting it in, right? That can be in a multitude of different forms. You can be giving it to in an organic form that is carbon-based. That then does have to be microbially processed into an inorganic plant available
there's work that needs to be done. That's
work that needs to be done
there. When you look at the nitrates versus the ammoniums, the nitrates, there's 4 times the amount of work that actually goes into the plant utilizing that. Another thing that actually happens with a lot of the nitrates is they rinse out of the soil real easy.
Yeah, they're water soluble. So that's so 2 things. One, it's very nice because they go into the plant really easily and quickly, being that they're water soluble. But 2, that also means that they can burn the plant. It's the only thing that's going to really burn a plant. You can lock out other things, but that's more of like a chemical lockout within the substrate. Nitrogen's the only one that you can really burn a plant, which is also why they always told you back in the day to overwater a little bit by 10 to 15%. That was just hedging the bets a little bit to make you not burn with nitrogen, because that'll run right out.
And most of your good fertilizers are going to have a mix of a little bit of ammonium and some nitrates. Because
typically you see, and even if you flip on the back, you'll see a certain percentage of one and the other, and they are assimilated in a little bit different time periods and things like that. But again, one thing I like to make people understand is that, what is a salt? The salt is anything that readily disassociates in water, and plants take up things in salt form because that's how they're able to. It's a bit of an exchange process. So that's how they're able to do the exchange. Even the cation exchange process, CEC, that's an exchange of cations on the soil substrate that then go, from there into the plant. So, that's more of a diffusion process. There's only 2 ways that nutrients are uptaken. That's by mass flow, which is basically just nitrogen, and everything else is diffusion.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So I do, nitrogen kind of is nitrogen a little bit, but I do like to kind of compare it to like high fructose corn syrup versus cane sugar. They're both sugar. They're both essentially the same molecule. But I do believe that the plant, operates with it slightly differently.
Well, and part of this is we want to educate people. We want to help kind of just bring the light to certain things. Because I'll be honest with you, even on this, there was stuff I learned on this.
Yeah, no, this is definitely fun for us because it helps us go back into it. I mean, this is stuff that I may have learned a long time ago, but it's like, it's nice to have a refresher on. It's nice to really look at it, and I mean, as I look there too, it's like, watch out for urea. If you're using urea, just pee on your plants. It's definitely the cheapest, shittiest form of nitrogen. So watch out for that on the back of the bottles, folks.
Right, and it's funny too because even when you think about just the whole process where they're attaching those hydrogen molecules to the nitrogen.
Right.
You think about stuff like the Hindenburg.
Right.
And like the Hindenburg was that thing was a hydrogen bomb.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You think about you think about rocket fuel and stuff, and a lot of these hydrogen-based things, you're like, wow.
Well, they're super volatile.
That is pretty flammable stuff.
Well, and it's super volatile, and that's why, and again, I'm not a chemist, but that's one of the ways this all works is by them being volatile, by them being able to hop from molecule to molecule and things like that. So obviously we've got, pretty well to the end of our real knowledge here on nitrogen. But it is something, again, we're always wanting to kind of introduce these subjects, put them out there. If you want to learn more about it, there's a ton of information out there. Go look into the nitrogen cycle, go familiarize with yourself about it. One other great place to do that. Actually, you know what? Let's talk a little bit about the Haber-Bosch process, actually, because that is, as we talked about, that's making ammonium hydrate anhydrous ammonia, NH4 or NH3, which again, no, I'm a horticulturist. I'm not a chemist.
I mean, look, that extra H in there,
It'll get you. And actually, it looks like Gabe, you did a great job. You took that right off the top of your head. 2 times the atmospheric pressure, or 200 times the atmospheric pressure, et cetera, et cetera. We kind of talked about its history with crops. I think we beat down nitrogen quite a bit. There's a lot of information you guys can keep going out there. It's our job to introduce it, give you the knowledge that we have. If you have any additional questions or want some resources, please reach out. But we did want of segue.
Well, honestly, the funniest thing is I saw someone not too long ago saying that nitrogen came from petroleum. And I was kind of like, hey, that's not exactly correct. Now, granted, I said, it's funny because I said something to Eugene, and Eugene sent me an article where there is a process where someone does it. As far as for large-scale horticulture and producing nitrogen for crops,
sure,
Haber-Bosch is the way.
Haber-Bosch is the way, yeah.
You know what I mean? In which, again, it uses natural gas, which is energy intensive, and it uses coal if you get it from countries like China. Now, one of the things I actually found quite, so another little tidbit of information, it was said that we get nitrogen from Russia. We produce 88% of the nitrogen that we use in the United States domestically, which I was surprised by.
I did not know that.
And then we get 12% from other countries, in which some was from like Trinidad and Tobago, some was from other countries that I didn't really think about. We produce 10% of the world's nitrogen. Russia produces 10% of the world's nitrogen. India produces 9% of the world's nitrogen, and coming in at the leader is China with 26% of the world's nitrogen. So I think, the information that's out there, I think that's the big thing, is that anybody can skew things to kind of look a certain way or the next. Truth of the matter is, no matter where you're getting nitrogen, unless you're getting Chilean saltpeter, it's an energy intensive.
He said saltpeter.
It's an energy intensive process. That's really where you're losing, is that the process to create it is energy intensive.
Right. Whereas, with good crop practices, et cetera, you do have plants like, that actually fix nitrogen. Those would be any legumes, things like that will actually fix nitrogen. Lightning does it naturally, like we talked about, which actually is a pretty staggering. Out of the 200 million, it was 7 million or
7
something.
7 million, yeah.
That was pretty crazy. Out of lightning, that's sizable.
That's super cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And it's funny because I think back on it now. And, when I was growing cannabis in Maryland, big farming community, lots of tractors, lots of different stuff around, and anytime it was about to rain, these guys would be out there spraying the fields, and it would smell absolutely horrible, like death, because they're out there spraying animal waste on the fields, so that way when it rains, it waters it into the ground.
Percolates in.
And I'll tell you what, you always knew when it was you always knew when it was going to rain. You didn't have to watch the weather because you just smell it before you're going. You're like, they're spraying. Must be going to rain in the next day or two, Must
be going to rain. Well, one other thing that we wanted to bring into this is anytime that there is applicable news, specifically, cannabis in the news, something we always want to talk about. So current events is always something interesting to talk about, keeping it specific to cannabis. The first one I actually found pretty interesting, although there wasn't much of a, and we will post,
not much context.
We'll post the link to this as well. But Bank of America, NRA, and MasterCard are lobbying on marijuana banking. However, they haven't said which way they're lobbying. We don't know if they're for it or against
it. It just says they're lobbying. Well, it's funny because I always tell cannabis people, don't support the NRA. Because they don't support us, and that's actually that was the clickbait for me.
That was the clickbait for you,
because I was like, oh man, maybe the NRA is coming out to support us.
No.
And then I go read the article, and it's like, well, they're lobbying, but we don't know which way.
For something. Again,
the NRA needs help, so they're probably lobbying for it. So
who knows? Again, we just present the news. We don't create it.
So the next article I actually thought was really interesting. Georgia is talking about introducing cannabis into pharmacies.
So we're talking Walgreens, Walmart.
Yeah, we're talking Walgreens, CVS, that kind of thing. So interestingly enough, it would be under the medical. It would be under the medical guys, and then beyond that, there would be THC limits as far as how potent it could be.
See, now that's where I feel like that's where you get into a weird zone, right? When you start talking about not a dispensary but a pharmacy that's doing it, and now you're putting caps on things that, from somebody who doing what we do and really being somebody that's into phenotypic expression and genetic potential, we would never be about capping.
Well, and it goes that Schedule 2, Schedule 3 route where it's kind of uber controlled and stuff like that. It's interesting to see. I mean, I hate to say it, that is a lot of the route that you see the South taking, Mississippi, Louisiana, all those places. I mean, when we were in Mississippi earlier this winter, I mean, it was anything over 0.01 grams to like 2 grams of extract was like 2 years in jail.
Right.
Because they're looking at it as like heroin.
Yeah, this is drugs.
So it's definitely interesting to see. I mean, we've always said the South is really going to be the last place. It's going to be the last stronghold. Florida is kind of its own place.
Look, Florida's its own place. Florida's its own country as far as I'm concerned. It's got its own. Shout out to Florida. Shout out to Urban Roots. Florida is fucking Florida.
Yeah, it's interesting down there. But yeah, no, it's interesting to see. I mean, obviously.
Well, and even with Minnesota said, we're going to sell seeds in Home Depot and things like that. To me, the one thing I like about it is you are seeing a general acceptance across the board, for cannabis. It's saying, hey, look.
Unless it's Wyoming or Idaho.
Well, that's never going to happen. I mean, but for them to say, look, if we're going to call it this, I mean, it's kind of like when New York was like, hey, if you can smoke a cigarette there, you can smoke weed there.
Yeah,
that was definitely, to me, a step in the direction that says, hey, okay, you can't call it legal and then continue to marginalize us, which is always what it's felt like a little bit. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, when do we get to start smoking in the comedy clubs, Grambo? I mean, come on. What the hell? When's that happening?
International Church of Cannabis has an open smoking show every now and then.
Oh, well, all right.
I had to fight the federal government to get that. That's not how it works.
That's okay. All right. So we're a ways off, it sounds like. However, we were in Chicago, or outside Chicago, actually, not anywhere close to Chicago, and it went in the first place that there was a bar and restaurant. You walk through a door, you're in a dispensary. You walk through a door, you're in a consumption lounge.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
I was disappointed to see that Illinois figured that out before Colorado did.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that was...
Well, and those guys are smart where they're at because they're right on that Indiana border.
45 minutes from Indianapolis.
Yeah, so it's like...
People want to come and actually hang out.
The traffic they can get from there is definitely nice.
Yeah. So, obviously, current events is something we want to keep up with. If anybody does ever see anything that's worth talking about, please forward that our way to the Jug Dealers podcast. Again, this is something where we're looking for a lot of interaction from our listeners. So if you do see something cool out there, by all means, shoot it over to us. We might just have a chat about it on air.
So, Jayhawk, let's...
watching at this point, subscribe, hang out. We're going to be doing this show every week. So find us on Instagram and definitely like, comment, subscribe. I know it's cheesy. We're trying to build it up there. So thank you guys so much for the support recently. I know Gabe and Jaron are super stoked. I'm super stoked.
We are very much
stoked.
stoked.
So much for all the support. So yeah, find us on Instagram at Jug Dealers.
Yeah, see, that's why we got him back there. He's keeping us in line as usual.
So let's get to your we got a new little segment we're gonna talk about called Jaron's Strain of the Week.
Yeah. So
what's your strain of the week this week?
this is one, and admittedly, I don't even have this anymore, which is part of the reason why I wanted to throw it out to the Jug Dealers and the juggernauts out there. I wanted to know if anybody's got it. So Chemodo breath is what I wanted to chat about today. So Chem, C-H-E-M, which you're a chem guy.
Oh, yeah.
You're a chem guy. So C-H-E-M, Chemodo breath, right? So a little bit kind of, interesting little play on words there, but it is a mostly indica variety from Mycotech. Mycotech's definitely brought out some big time fire over the years. Shout out to Mycotech.
What's the lineage?
It is OGKB 2.0 mother, but it's from a bag seed. That's the whole 2.0 seed of OGKB purchased in the Bay Area circa 2014. That's the story I've got on it. The male is the Gorilla Dog father, who has quite the genetic resume. Consists of 4 Chem Dog cuts, which is Chem 91, Chem 4, Chem D, and Chem Cis. So it's a 4-way Chem cross. This impact between the cookies and chems. And again, we're a big fan of GMO. So cookies, chem, I'm a big fan of. I'll tell you what, I had it for a while. It was the best It was the best chem bud I've ever had. Big.
What's the morphology?
Fat.
Short?
It's pretty short, but got these big old fat, like just almost squared off kind of triangular nuggets, you know? So it's had that real chem look to it, but really like greased out like a good Gorilla Glue or something like that. Not a lot of color. It was good green weed, which, you know, bring that good green weed back, folks.
We love green, greasy
yellowed
weed.
out, you know, just like that perfect fully yellow families. Something I really, really enjoyed. If anybody does happen to have it out there, I would love to get it back someday. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to throw it out there. I was like, you know, who knows? Maybe somebody has it. But it is something we're going to continue to have. Strains of the Week. You know, we're obviously always working with different stuff, but also just bringing up interesting stuff or things from the past or whatever. You'll see this as a recurring theme. And in fact, same thing if somebody has, you know, one other one that interesting that I keep seeing pop up again. It's like it came back from the dead is Shishkaberry. You know, it was a hardcore New Mexico strain. I grew it back in the day, got it out of New Mexico. You still see it on menus in New Mexico, but I started seeing some crosses come back out of it. Pretty sure Professor P, Dynasty Genetics, has some work that he's been doing with Shishkaberry, if I remember correctly. But anyway, we'll also probably be doing, you know, having you guys send in some pictures and maybe even pick, you know, you know.
We're going to do a Butt of the Week thing.
Butt of the Week kind of thing, so kind of tie these two things together.
So let's talk about you know, this weekend. Cultivate held their final event for the year, number three and final for the year. 80, I want to say it was 84, 85 entries.
85, 86, somewhere like that. I mean, it was I mean, honestly,
it was a gauntlet. I'm hoping for, you know, we talked about it, and I'm hoping for some hash events next year because, you know, I want to get down.
Well, and I think some hash events are warranted, being that, you know, we are oil farmers, so it's like, if what are we growing here, folks? But even, you know, Daryl was even like, man, this is like maybe too many strains. He was like, I think
it borderline was. I mean, it was hard to keep your head straight. I mean, you know, I mean, I gotta say too. Probably 50% was probably real similar stuff.
Yeah, a lot of gelato. Know, I mean, but
like a lot of cakes, a lot of gelato.
A lot of cakes, a lot of gelato. And no surprises there, but it almost been nice to have it split up into like fruit and gas and kind of like split up. And Daryl even said something about that.
I like that's one thing that like Dre Cup's been doing. Doug Dre Cup, Hitman Dougie, he's been doing different flavors and kind of keeping it to, because sometimes it's real hard. It's hard to put a haze against a chem or a haze against.
Is it even fair?
Like, because it's like, and the guy who won, like, his was pretty unique, dude. It was definitely
so
different.
Shout out to Mile High Dave. He's done some good work. He selected that cut, I believe, is from Clearwater Buds. It's Dante's Inferno #6. It's that he calls it the Colorado Cherries. It does have a candied cherry. The amount of trikes on that thing was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was, dude.
I mean,
you know, bow down.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I'll say this. The guy that won, if you looked at all the herb, that's the one that really stood out. I know that I had a couple in there that did really well. We'll get final results on it. That peach that did #3, that Palisade peach, I thought was really good as well. I don't know if I smoked what got second.
I'll be honest with you, man. Some of the stuff I smoked for Mark that wasn't entered, that was just like the triangle.
Oh, and the shout out to Root Cellar.
SFV, yeah, Root Cellar.
Shout out to Root Cellar. He had some fire on him, and it's always very unique stuff. I mean, he's always got it. He's definitely an OG. You know who you are. And for those of you that know,
those of you that know,
you know.
I mean, the thing about that is, those events, like, it's such a nice gathering. It's such a good, you know, a lot of us, we just don't see each other as much as we used to.
Well, no, we don't. And, you know, speaking of that, if there are events like this, which that's the stuff we're more and more into now. That's the stuff we want to show up. We want to rep out. We want to, you know, we want to hobnob with the community. You know, this is a great event. I'd much rather do that than go and sit in in some convention hall for a day or two.
XX con,
whatever
con.
Yeah, whatever con. Yeah, whatever they con you into is what it is. So if there are events out there, you know, I know even, Adams Farmers Market, which you had the last one this year, you know, things like that. I mean, dude, if there's cool stuff out there, like, let us know. You never know. I mean, you never know. Jug dealers are always out and about. Again, thank you guys for listening. We'll go ahead and put the wrap on this one, but you'll be seeing us very much on the regular. Thank you, Grambo. Appreciate you as always. Here from the Jug Den at 5-8 Distribution.
Stay safe.
Peace out, everybody.